Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Perez. I hope you are well and your family's well and you're working hard and staying busy. Today it's started out to be a little bit overcast and kind of chilly again, so I thought it would be a good day to spend in our craft room, spare room, laboratory, and do a little sewing. So let's get started. Okay, let's get started by looking at some of the tools that we'll be using for our hand sew project. It's my sewing box. This is a tape measure. We won't be using that today. That's for measuring larger pieces of fabric. We have this handy thing. This helps you thread a needle. I'll show you how to use that later. Speaking of needles, we'll be using these size needles, tapestry needles or embroidery needles, because they're larger and they're easier to thread and they're not as sharp as some of the finer needles are. So they're good for this project. We're going to be using fabric, it's felt. We'll be using a felt fabric, which is a nice fabric to use for beginners. Here's an assortment of needles. I like how this is stored. It's nice and safe and organized. It's a magnet that helps you pick up needles. Goes in that pocket. This is for mistakes that we make, and we will make them eventually. So this is called a seam ripper. I'm going to show you how to use that in a little bit. Chalk. It's always good to have on hand. And this is a thimble. This helps protect your fingers with those sharps. It's called sharps. The sharper assorted needles. And inside we have our fabric scissors. These are scissors that we only use with fabric. You don't want to use them on paper or on anything else. I hide them from my family so that they don't use them on things that would destroy them. So they stay nice and sharp as long as you only use them on fabric. We have our pin cushion, tomato, and our strawberry. So the tomato holds our pins. I like these big bold pins. And the strawberry has something in it, I believe it's sawdust, I'm not positive, that helps sharpen your pin heads. Okay. We have a little button box in here, some buttons. So we'll pick some buttons out later for our project. And a little bit of thread. Okay, let's get started. Okay, we have our tools together, things that we're going to need. We're going to make a small pouch. That's what our project's going to be. Something I've done with students before. I think it's a pretty good place to start when you're first learning how to sew. So we're going to use, I like to use felt because it doesn't fray at the ends, meaning the threads don't come apart. So I like to use a piece of felt. We have just like a nice little rectangle here, and those needles, the embroidery needles that I was talking about. So we're going to start off with cutting our felt. So it's just going to be a little pouch. I'm not even going to really measure. I'm going to make it about this wide. We'll measure our fabric later when we work on the machine. Okay, so that's going to be what we're going to use for the felt. So it's a rectangle. It's about 3 inches, almost on the dot, by a little more than 9 inches, 9¼ inches. So 3 by 9, that's a good size. And basically, we're going to have, this is going to form the bottom pouch part, and then we're going to have this top that comes over, and we're going to put a button there. Okay, so that's a really good size for our project. Okay, so the next thing we're going to decide is what type of stitch we're going to use on our button pouch. So I like to take a look at the internet to get some ideas. Okay, so there's a lot of information here. These are some charts of different basic stitches that you can do while hand sewing, kind of like this chart right here. So we're going to take a look at 2 different stitches. We're going to take a look at the running stitch, which I think is a nice stitch to start out with as a beginner, and also the whip stitch. We're going to take a look at both. I like the whip stitch for this project because we are connecting 2 pieces of material together, and the whip stitch kind of secures it a little better than the running stitch. Okay, next thing we're going to do is pick our thread, which I picked white thread so that you could see it easily, hopefully, and thread our needle. So you're going to unwind some thread. You want to get, maybe, I like to use an arm's length. I like to use an arm's length for me, but when you're first starting out, maybe not as long, quite as long, just a shorter amount. And once you get the hang of it, you can use a longer length of thread. Okay, so we're going to thread our needle. I'm going to pick this embroidery needle here. Okay, so here's our needle. Now this thing helps you thread your needle. So there's a little wire on the top that's stiff, so it's easy to poke through the needle. Like that. Okay. And then that is an easier eye or opening. The opening is called the eye. That's an easier eye to put your thread through. See? Okay, and then you can pull your thread through like that and thread your needle. So it helps you thread your needle. And I use it in the classroom a lot because my eyes are not what they used to be. So it helps me help students thread their needle. Okay. And so that's double. That's double the thread. Okay. You're going to find the end. See the 2 double pieces here. Trim it off. And then I'm going to just make a knot. And I'm going to try to make this knot. I'm going to go through the center a couple of times. And I'm going to try to make that knot as close to the end as I can to get the most out of my thread. Okay, trim that off. And now we have threaded our needle. Okay, now that we have threaded our needle, we're going to get ready. We're going to prepare our fabric to sew together. So we're going to make a pouch. So this is going to be the pouch part. This is the bottom. And this is the top that's going to kind of come over, and we'll put a button there later. So I want the bottom to be, I want the pouch part to be a little bit bigger than the flap. Okay? I want the flap to, I think I'd like to better before. About there. You could go exactly, but I like my flap to be a little shorter than the bottom. All right, so that's good. So I'm going to pin this in place. So I'm going to use one of my straight pins. I think I'll use a yellow one here. And we're just going to stick this through the back and up the top, just like that. Do the same thing on this side here. Back, through the top. Okay, and that's just going to keep our pouch in place. So that when we're sewing, we don't go crooked, okay? All right, so we're going to get started. Remember, our knot was at the end here, okay? So we're going to start our pouch at one corner. I said I was going to do a running stitch. So we don't want the knot to show. So we're going to go inside the pouch, right in the corner here, on the inside. So just one layer. And we're going to pull the needle through. Okay. All right, so it's not sewed together yet. And this is going to get us started. Okay, so this is going to be a running stitch. So the running stitch is going to go down. There's the back. So it goes all the way through. All right. You don't want to pull it too hard. You don't want to pull the knot right out because it is felt. And then you go through the top. Down, so it's going to the back. Now, when you get the hang of it, see, back, you can actually come back up. See how your needle's through? And when you pull it through, so it kind of looks like dashes. Kind of looks like dashes. There. Okay. Like that. And like that. Now I would just keep going with the flap to make the flap decorative. See how it looks the same in the back? So it's like dashes. Okay. So I'm going to just keep going around. So I'm continuing around. When I get to the corner, I'm just going to make a turn. Now you don't want to pull it too much because you don't want your fabric to wrinkle like this. So you want to kind of be easy on it. Just going around the flap. That's just to give it a decorative edge. Okay, I'm all the way around. Now I'm going to start sewing the pocket part together down here. Okay. And I'm going to get down to here. Oops. And do my knot. Okay, so for my knot, I came halfway through. I didn't come all the way through to the top. I stopped there. See that loop? So I'm inside where my knot started. And I'm going to take the thread. I'm going to twist it around my needle. Come up through. It's going to make my knot, and then I'm just going to finish on the inside, not all the way through. Again, on the inside, just one layer. And then I'm trimming that. My knot's on the other side. Okay. So there's my pouch with the running stitch. Take my pins out, and I have a nice little pouch right like that. Okay. Okay, so there's the pouch that I made using the running stitch. I prepared another pouch, same size, to show you the whip stitch. And I like the whip stitch a little better because I feel like it's a little bit more secure. The running stitch kind of can break apart a little bit, where the whip stitch, even though it's a little more difficult for a beginner, it does a better job for our pouch. Okay, so I knotted my thread. I'm using a short piece of thread this time for demonstration purposes. Okay, so same thing. We're going to start on the inside so we don't see the knot and come out. Okay, tuck that in. All right, so the whip stitch is like its name. It whips, okay? So you're going to whip it from the back to the front. Okay. It's in the back. Gonna whip it around to the front. It's in the back. Whip it around to the front. Now, I want you to notice something. This is the tricky part. You have to keep going forward, and you have to make sure that you don't when you go through the back, that you don't get behind your thread, okay? So you're whipping it around. You're kind of going up on an angle, like climbing a ladder with it, see? And you just want to make sure that you're not going backwards or tangling it up, okay? Just keeps coming around. So it kind of looks like a candy cane stripe. You know how a candy cane stripe wraps around the candy cane? Now, it's not as nice looking. If you take your time, it can be more uniform. It's not as nice looking, I think, as the running stitch. Running stitch, you can get it nice and even. If you take your time, which I'm not taking my time, you can get it a little nicer looking. Okay, and you want to make sure that you go through both layers of material. Okay, so I whipped stitched all the way around this pouch, the second pouch, and I finished my knot right here. I don't want the end, the tail to show, so I'm just going to stick it through to the inside of the pouch. The knot's already there. Just kind of stick it through and then cut it off. Inside the pouch, and you won't be able to see it. So the whip stitch, as you can see, is a lot more secure than the running stitch. Running stitch kind of pulls apart a little bit, depending on what you want to put in your pouch. Okay, so if you're going to use it for a tooth fairy pouch, you might want to use the whip stitch because your tooth is smaller than maybe something larger. Okay, so there's the running stitch and the whip stitch. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pick out some buttons for our pouches. So the flap's going to go over and we're going to be able to button it shut. I have my button box here. It's full of buttons from different things. You know, shirts, blouses come with these little baggies of buttons. Sometimes the tag has buttons on it. Like this one. Sometimes they come in fancy little envelopes. This one has a couple different sizes, so that's kind of nice. And I just collect them. This is just like a little button box. Most of my buttons are at schools 2 and 4. All my interesting, cute little buttons. I can show you what this uses now. I'm going to take these buttons off this tag here. So this is the seam ripper that I was talking about earlier that helps us fix mistakes. Just put that aside for a second. So how it would work is you take this pointed part. You have to be careful. And you kind of maneuver it underneath the unwanted threads or stitching. And you kind of just pick at it a little bit. Pick at it. You don't want to ruin the material. You can pick at the front too. We're taking this button off, so see how that thread just comes right out? And now look, the button is off the tag. And if we cared about the material, which I don't know that we do, but if we did care about it, we could just delicately take this off without destroying the material. Okay, so that's how a seam ripper or a mistake fixer for sewing purposes works. Okay, so we're picking out our buttons. I just wanted to share this with you. This is something I made for my son Jordan when he was in first grade. I embroidered it. It says Jordan's 100th day of school. So the buttons are the zeros in Jordan, well, the O in Jordan and the 100, the zeros in 100, and the O's in school. And there are 100 buttons in here. So they've been in here for a long time. So I just wanted to share that with you. I thought that was cute. And that's a little button jar. Kind of looks like the ones we have in school. So I'm looking for, I want pretty big buttons. These are really cute buttons with the little polka dots in them. But I want a bigger button than that for my project. So I feel like I'm kind of stuck with these darker buttons. There's a button there. Here was a button. This is kind of cool. This button has 4 holes. That's 4 holes. This button has, even though it's too small and I'm not using it, that has 2 holes. And this button has 1 hole in the back. Okay, so I think I'm going to use this button and this button just to show you the difference, just to show you how it looks different and how you attach it differently. It's good to know how to sew a button on. Okay, we're going to get ready to sew our buttons on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of see where we want the button to come through. So I want it to kind of come through right there. So I'm going to just mark. This is chalk. This was in my sewing box too. Just a little chalk. You're not going to really see it because the button's going to cover it up. But if you were to see it, chalk washes off really easily. It doesn't ruin the fabric. So we're just going to mark where we want our buttons to go. All right, so I've threaded this needle. We're going to get started. Now, here's the tricky part. You don't want to sew your pocket shut. So you're only working with this top layer of fabric. And this is where students kind of have to redo it because they'll sew right through the back of the pouch. So you want to make sure you can keep that opening open. Okay, so we're going to take our needle. We're going to go through the inside because we don't want that knot to show. And I'm just going to go right through where my chalk mark was. Right through. Okay. So the knot is on the inside of our pouch. Okay. Now it helps if you just slide your fingers in there. Then you're for sure not going to sew up the back of your pouch. You might stick your finger with the needle, but remember that's that blunt embroidery needle anyway, so it's not going to hurt that badly. Okay, so I'm going to start with my 4 buttonhole, and I'm using white thread so that you can see. So I'm going to come through 1. Okay, now it's really on loose, so you can kind of maneuver it still. And I'm going to do a crisscross. I'm going to do a crisscross. So I'm going to go in there. This one you have to be careful not to sew your pouch together. It's to come through the inside. Okay, so that's getting it started. Still on the inside. I'm going to look for my chalk mark outside. And I'm going to do a crisscross. Okay, crisscross. My button's on there. Okay, I did a nice little crisscross pattern. And I'm going to repeat this crisscross 2 more times. 3 times total. Should be good. Now, if I go into a different hole, then I'm going to lose my crisscross pattern. So you want to be careful that you're following your pattern. Okay. Like that. Just take your time. You don't have to go as fast as I do. I've sewed on a lot of buttons. Okay. And I'll do it one more time. Okay, so I have my buttons pretty secure right now. So I'm going to do the knot. So I'm actually going to turn my pouch inside out. So that's the inside of my pouch. Okay. Where my button is. And now I can really show you how to do a knot. So you just make a stitch in the back here. You're not going to see it. That's your button back there. Kind of put your needle in. You don't pull it all the way through. You take your thread and you wrap it around 1, 2, 3 times. And you continue your needle through. That's quite a knot. A sloppy knot. And I'm going to trim that off. Okay. There I have my button. Okay, now I'm going to use my single hole button. This button's, in some ways it's easier, I think. And it has a neater look. It has a different appearance because you don't see the threads at all. Okay, so for this button, I'm going to start the same way. I marked it. I'm going to go in through the inside and come out. I don't have to pull it too hard. And then I'm going to go through the single hole in the back, the button, and I'm going to go in really close to the spot that I came out of. Not exactly, but really close. In through the inside again. And that puts that button on. Okay. Now I'm going to repeat that a couple of times. So I'm going to come out almost in the same spot, go through the one buttonhole here, tighten that up, and go back in without sewing the pocket shut. Okay, so it's all on the inside. Okay, so I'll repeat that again and again. Okay, so this button's on pretty good. So I'm going to go in through the inside one last time. I'm going to turn it inside out because I'm ready to make my knot. Okay, pull through, do another little stitch. Okay, don't go all the way. Wrap it around 1, 2, 3, and then pull the needle, and then I have my nice knot, and I can trim it off. There I have my button. Okay, it's time to make the buttonhole. So basically I'm going to come over, and I'm going to kind of mark where my button is. Just with a little chalk. I usually help students do this. Okay. And unfold it. And I like to kind of fold it this way. And then you're going to take your fabric scissors and you're only going to do half a button size. So you do a little bit of a cut. You can kind of test your button out. If it goes through nice and easy, like that one just did, then you're good. You got your buttonhole. That's why I like using felt. Again, it doesn't fray the edges, so you can just cut a nice little buttonhole. You don't have to sew a buttonhole in half the button size. It's a little tight. Nope, that works. Okay, so then we have our 2 button pouches. Okay, there you have it, our button pouches. I hope you had fun. I hope you find a good use for them. They're a good tooth fairy pouch. I like to store my needles, my sharps in them, that little disc. You can store other buttons in them. Okay, you can put money in them. All right, so I hope you had fun today. Maybe next time we'll try out the sewing machine and do a nice little project on that. Stay busy, stay healthy, and I'll see you soon. Bye.